We're back on the RRN Ropen Radio Network, broadcasting from the heart of Oregon, and Salem is listening. I want to thank all my fellow Oregonians watching on CC Media, but if you're joining us on the social network hotspots such as YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, thank you for commenting. Thank you for subscribing. A couple of neat things coming up for the month of November and December before we wrap up the year. For starters, I received a message from a very famous cryptozoologist, Ken Gerhardt. Credit to you. Gave me a referral. A gentleman living in Idaho in 2015 was out hunting, was nearly attacked by a ropen. He's seen this creature twice now in the same location. It's going to get exciting. This month in November, we're traveling out there on location to meet with him in person. So instead of doing it in the studio, he's only 2.5 hours away from me. I might as well go see him. He currently now lives in Washington State. We're going to have a chance to speak with him on the network. It's going to get exciting before we wrap up the year. Also, another guest of mine is going to be appearing. I consider him to be a person who's been there and done that, a ropen enthusiast. He's going to shed some light on the subject that we're going to be talking about today. On this network, we talk about the strange, the unknown to science. The question is this: is there a living theropod roaming Australia's Northern Territory? Well, that is the subject for today's show. For years now, I have heard of stories pertaining to this creature. It does have quite a few names, but the name Burrunjor seems to be the most recognized. Now, it might surprise you to know that there are a few variations of Burrunjors. This does depend on the location, for instance. A great majority of the reports come from southern Australia. The latest account in 2014. First and foremost, what is a theropod? Well, they are carnivorous dinosaurs from a group of members that are typically bipedal and range from small and delicately built to extremely large, such as Gorgosaurus, Allosaurus, Albertosaurus, Tarbosaurus, and of course, everyone's favorite, Tyrannosaurus Rex. Is that what this thing is? We shall see. Is it really possible that a large saurian from the late Cretaceous survived and is now roaming the deserts of Arnhem Land and Queensland? For many, such as myself, the answer is yes. But if there is one, then there must be more in order for them to thrive. So it's not just one, it's got to be more of them. Now, depending on which Burrunjor you are referring to, there is in fact quite a bit of eyewitness testimonies involving the beast, and we will get to some of those. This was enough to capture the imagination of one particular author, which prompted him to write a book on the subject. My guest today is an author of many cryptid books such as Demon Flyer, which I read. He's also a radio host for KYCA Tri-City Sports with his own show called Rust Rants, which you can find on social network hotspots. His latest book is titled Burrunjor. Let's welcome back to the network, John Rust.
It is I. How's it going?
It is a pleasure to have you back on. John, I'm a big fan of your books. I'm excited here. Welcome back to the network, John.
Glad to be back, and thanks again for the invite, man. Appreciate it.
You bet. I got to say, it looks like you're pretty busy in the sports world. Is that the case still? Doing a lot of radio talk?
Oh, honestly, this time of year, things do get pretty busy for me sports-wise here in Prescott, because we're doing our high school football broadcast with Prescott football. I've got sports to cover at 3 different high schools around the area. Our local junior college, our 4-year college, Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and I also do freelance play-by-play for Embry-Riddle while I'm covering their games. And then, of course, the play-by-play, it's not just, plopping yourself in a seat and just babbling on and on. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes in prior to the games as far as gathering notes and stats. bios on players for our football broadcast. I have to do like pre-recorded interviews. Like I have a pregame interview with the player. I have a halftime interview with the player. I also have another halftime interview with either coaches or players from the other sports teams around the high school. So this time of year can get pretty busy.
That was a mouthful right there. That sounds pretty busy to me.
A longer answer than you expected.
No, I like it. Perfect. Your book count, what are we up to now as far as how many books you've actually written?
Would you believe 21 now have been published? And I mean, the first one was Dark Wings back in 2011. So, it's now, if my math is correct, and sometimes it's not because I stink at math. So that's 11 years and 21 books. So, somehow I keep pumping them out with my busy schedule.
So being busy, 21 books. Now we come to something new. And you brought this to my attention. I did not know you were working on this one. No, I did not. What made you want to pursue a story about the Burrunjor?
Well, sometimes what I like to do with my Jack Raston, Karen Thatcher novels, now it's Jack and Karen Raston. They are married in this fourth adventure of theirs, so I got to keep remembering that. But one of the things I kind of like to do with my stories is look at some of the cryptids that are not, say, mainstream or aren't that well known by the general public. It's like, I mean, even people who don't believe in them, they know about Bigfoot, they know about the Loch Ness Monster, probably know about the Jersey Devil. Well, if you grew up in Jersey, you certainly know about the Jersey Devil. So I kind of look at some of those maybe more obscure, lesser well-known cryptids. And I have seen a few mini docs on YouTube about the Burrunjor, mainly like on Unexplained Mysteries, a couple other channels like that. And of course, I'm always searching for, what would be a good cryptid for Jack and Karen and the rest of the gang to go after. And, the more I looked at the Burrunjor, that started to pique my interest. So I did a little more research about it. And one of the things I did was, for probably the layman, it sounds like it would be a Tyrannosaurus, but looking at the fossil records of Australia, there have been no fossils recovered for tyrannosaurs, so what the heck can I use? And I did find, it's a long name. I think it's the Austroventilator, I think is what it's called. For people who may not be familiar, think of the velociraptors from Jurassic Park, only they're about 20 feet long.
Yeah. And this thing does range in size from 20 to 30 feet from reports, but I want the entire audience to hear in depth about your book, because this is a chance to be able to explore that. I think gather from last time to this, I think it's just best to have you explain it in the best words you can. But before we get there, though, I do want to bring up something about the Burrunjor real fast, that if people are just now joining, they're going to find out that there is very little, depending on which Burrunjor you're referring to. So let me read a couple of things real fast, and we'll get to the topic of John Rust's book. The Burrunjor, also known as the Dinosaur, is an Australian dinosaur cryptid that resembles a theropod, a living tyrannosaur in Australia, but may be a descendant of Megaraptorids. The Burrunjor is described as being a giant reptile according to Aboriginal mythology. Based on sightings, it is 20 to 30 feet long, has small clawed hands on its bipedal, and is bipedal in nature. Throughout the 1950s, Australian cattle ranchers reported a large creature leaving bipedal tracks, was eating their livestock. The Aboriginal account suggests that it is a reptilian animal whose diet consists of kangaroos and other large animals. If it was not for the bipedal prints left, the Burrunjor could have been mistaken for a Megalania. I'll get to that. Varanus priscus is the Megalania type, a prehistoric giant monitor lizard that lived in the area more recently based on the Aboriginal descriptions. The Burrunjor, also called the Magungali, Wahui, and Dirawong, is also said to inhabit the high-altitude mountains in the Great Dividing Range and may occasionally go to the flatter areas like the outback when food is scarce. I would agree. They are usually described as being 20 to 30 feet long. We cover that. Burrunjor scales are a mottled green and gray, sometimes making them mistaken for logs when stationary, depending on what kind of Burrunjor we're referring to, though, of course. So here, they may be referring to the Megalania. Burrunjors can stand on two legs, although they cannot walk while standing. Their diet consists of kangaroos, emus, wallabies, and livestock. There are many cases of livestock being dragged away from their farm. Usually the livestock remains are found deep in the woods, usually eaten. The most likely for the explanation of the Burrunjor's origin is that it's a genuine animal, is a small surviving population of Megalania, prisca, a monitor lizard matching the description of the size of the Burrunjor, although they were thought to have died out roughly 50,000 years ago, possibly from climate change, overhunting by newly arrived humans. I'd beg to differ on the 50,000 range, but that's pretty darn close. Gives you a little bit of insight on what we're talking about. Two potentially kinds of Burrunjors, Megalania and a theropod. I would love to lean towards theropod, John. I really would. There's a problem, though, because, and I'm not going to say because it's a dinosaur. They're both dinosaurs. They're both reptiles. But there's very little about the theropod Burrunjor. Anyway, that point aside, it makes for a fascinating story and a chance to have that brought out because no one has done that. And very few people come to mind when they actually go looking for this thing in Australia. So thank you for making that into a story, John. Let's get into it. Let's hear about what you've done with this book.
Okay. Well, in fact, here's a copy of it right here so you can see for yourself. And thanks to Severed Press, my small press publisher, for publishing this and doing the cover. Grateful that they're able to do that because I'm no kind of artist whatsoever. I can't even do stick figures well. But basically, this picks up several months after my last book, Demon Flyer. And at the end of that, Jack and Karen were married. So, and I did drop a hint there that they were going to Australia for their honeymoon. So yes, a little foreshadowing there. So they're in Australia. They're in Nitmalik National Park, which is in the Northern Territory, and they're on a group outing. They're going to be sailing down a river, looking at all the sights and looking at all the animals. And of course, Jack and Karen are going, oh, this is great. We're on a great honeymoon here. Until they come across this farmhouse where the tour group was going to stop and have lunch. Except when they get there, they find that the farmhouse is wrecked. And all they find are remains of animals and a footprint from this is going to be the theropod, the Burrunjor. So now Jack and Karen are like, okay, well, we've got a serious situation here. And as it turns out, the Burrunjor does attack. Jack, Karen, and their tour group now have to flee through the Australian bush, trying to outpace this thing, trying to keep the rest of the tour group alive. The one thing I really, really enjoyed about this book, the first three books I have in the Jack and Karen Raston series, they're going out looking for cryptids, but they're with a group of experienced researchers and experienced former military people. So, and they have all the latest equipment to help them look for these things, to help them stay in touch, to defend themselves. Well, here in Burrunjor, Jack and Karen do not have that. They are weaponless. They don't have that experienced group of people around them. Basically, all they have are just a diverse cast of civilians thrown into this situation. And now it's like, well, which of these people can we count on in an intense situation? Who's going to come through strong? Who's going to fold? Whose attitude is going to be detrimental to the group? So instead of having a lot of people they can trust, that they know that, hey, if anything goes wrong, I know this guy's going to have my back. I know that guy's going to have my back. Right now, it's sort of up in the air of who they can really depend on in this situation. Not only that, but this is really where you see Jack and Karen's ingenuity and survival skills come into play. And one of the things that really helped me with that was a buddy of mine had this huge book. It was the U.S. Air Force Survival Manual. And I went through that thing cover to cover, garnering all sorts of information that I thought would be helpful and would be believable in this kind of survival situation. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I also looked at other things about how to fashion a spear out of branches, and when the food supply gets down, what are you going to do? You're going to have to forage. In fact, one of the things I found out was how to capture ants and eat them.
Yeah.
I got to the point where I was even wondering, well, what do ants taste like? And a friend of mine, he'd been to Australia a few times, and he said one of the people that he was with, said, well, they had ants in a restaurant and it tasted like this, but I think they were like prepared. I think even one of them was like dipped in chocolate or something. But I'm like, yeah, I don't think they're going to be able to dip ants in chocolate or have them prepared restaurant style in the bush. So that's basically the gist of the story,
Okay.
where Jack, Karen, and this tour group, they have to find a way to survive this Burrunjor who is right on their tails all the time, that's stalking them through the forest. And again, it's like, which of these people that Jack and Karen are responsible for, which are going to rise, which are going to be problems.
Yeah, yeah. I like that idea too, because that's something you wouldn't expect. You mentioned that they became a couple. This is pretty much their honeymoon. So unfortunately, their honeymoon turns into disaster because they're being stalked by this thing. And which makes for a great scenario, because you're like, hey, you didn't come prepared to fight off something. But at the same time, what I like what John Russ does with his books is he has created a world where people almost are used to cryptids because they're hearing about them, like in Reptilian or Sea Raptor, Demon Flyer. There's rumors and whispers. It's not like today where it's like, okay, look, that's nonsense. Most people won't believe us. We're in the minority. But according to these books, people are like, oh, yeah, there's definitely got to be something out there. They're a part of our world. It's just whether or not you see it or not. But people know that they are, so they're no longer reluctant to believe that they're real. So that's what I love about the books that you do, how you bring that to life.
Yeah, and here I do a little more world building in that regard, because like I said, we're about maybe 3 or 4 years removed from the first novel, and like you said, at this point, people accept the fact that, yeah, these cryptids that we've heard about for decades and centuries, some of them do actually exist. One of the little world building things I use is that the organization that Jack and Karen work for, the Foundation for Undocumented Biological Investigation, or the
Yeah.
FUBI, they actually came up with a scale to determine the likelihood of existence of certain cryptids, and they factor in all sorts of things like the local ecology, how many sightings there have been, how much physical evidence has been left behind, what kind of climate they live in, what are the food sources available to them. So basically, they have a scale of 1 to 5, where a cryptid that's at 1 would be like very unlikely that it exists, to 5, which would be something like, yeah, this thing is probably, it's very likely that this thing exists. I think like my 1, when I reference it in the book, like my 1 was something like the Dover Demon. My 5 was something like the Black Cats of Exmoor over in England. So I do that. And then another one was when they're trying to, signal any potential search and rescue parties that might be looking for them. One of the members of the tour group, draws in the sand an arrow pointing to where they're located. And they also write in their dinosaur. And she asks Jack, is like, is anyone going to believe us if we write dinosaur in there? And he goes, well, I mean, we already know that Bigfoot exists, lizard men exist, Ropen exists. So it's not that far-fetched right now.
Absolutely. Well, so your book was released in June of 2000 of this year. So how's it doing on the sales?
It's doing very well. I know right now, last I looked, I'm up to about 125 ratings and reviews. Most of them have been really good.
Positive, yeah.
I think probably like 85% of them have been either 4 or 5 stars, which the 5-star one kind of blows my mind, because you feel like 5 stars is reserved for something that's like a literary classic, something like, Lord of the Rings or something like that. And I guess, well, if someone's giving me 5 stars, I guess they really like the book, so I'm not going to complain. But
No.
like I said, I mean, for a small press, author like myself, just to see people who I don't even know buying the book, reading the book, enjoying the book. Again, like I said, I'm not a James Patterson or anything like that. I'm not a lead child or anything like that. So for someone to take a chance on, maybe what I feel is kind of an unknown author, to invest their time and money and really enjoy the book and think enough about it to leave a rating or a review. Like I said, that just thrills me. So and I also think, I guess I'm doing something right with these books.
Oh, definitely. I think you're tackling a subject that's in your books are very real. There's a lot of wonderful information that you put forth in your books to keep the person who's reading engaged. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I don't really know of many authors out there who tackle the subject of cryptid stories. They might tackle the research part of what others have done. Okay. But turning them into stories, you're actually the first I know of so far that actually turned each and every one of these things, just going in that direction and keeps continuing to produce these kind of books. It's nice. It's refreshing because we're just not used to it. And here we go.
Yeah. And actually, that's one thing. My publisher, Severed Press, who's based out of Tasmania, they do quite a bit. Their bread and butter are kaiju stories, cryptid stories.
Okay.
In fact, I can't remember the author's name, but Severed Press did publish a book titled Dover Demon, which the author crafted his own story and his own mythos around the Dover Demon, which of course was only cited a few times back in 1978. Or somewhere around that time period. Never heard of it again. But, the guy wrote a very, very compelling story surrounding the Dover Demon. And that's just like one example of many from Severed Press, where they deal with dinosaurs, other kinds of cryptids.
It's right up their alley. They like that kind of stuff. They like to see those kind of stories.
Because, because like Sea Raptor actually started out as a self-published book, and it did fairly well on Amazon. And then that's when I got contacted by Severed Press, and they said, "Look, we do a lot of stuff with cryptids and kaiju, so we think that your book would fit in very well for us." And I was like, "Wow!" It's like for an actual publisher to just come to me out of the blue and say, "Hey, we're interested in your book." I was like, "Yeah, sure." I mean, I did some research on them beforehand. And then I'm like, okay, these guys seem legit. They seem like they put in a lot of good work, so let's go for it. And then, 4 books later, and I also have like kind of an independent one from the Jack Raston storyline, and it's this one called Operation Beast Slayer.
Yeah, I did run into that one. I haven't read it yet. No.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's basically me wanting to write my own giant monster book where it's just NATO battling stone giants, and I throw a fire-breathing dragon in there, and I've got a little dash of Norse mythology in there, and just lots and lots of attack helicopters and combat planes. So this is like, that's just the big time shoot 'em up, blow 'em up story.
That actually reminds me of is it Jerry Bruckheimer or Michael Bay? One or the other. Just. That's how we describe
Jerry Bruckheimer, because I just can't stand Michael Bay. He's good with explosions, but the man does not know how to tell a good story at all, my opinion.
Well, I'm glad you went this direction instead of going in the direction of the giant spider. Because when last time we talked, you were not that a giant spider isn't interesting. It definitely makes for a great conversation piece when we are talking about cryptids. But trying to gather a story around it may not be as scary. But a living dinosaur chasing you on your honeymoon in Australia, that sounds more interesting to me. And I'm glad you went that way, because most people probably wouldn't, but you did.
Yeah. And I tried doing a giant spider story as part of the Jack and Karen Raston universe a while ago. And, it didn't work out. And a lot of people would say, well, because my thing was, I just don't think this cryptid is really all that scary. And some people would probably say, what do you mean? It's a 5-foot long spider. That would scare me. But I'm like,
but you could kill it.
It doesn't move all that fast. And, if Jack and his, field security specialists are armed with assault rifles and pistols and everything, they're just going to shred that sucker. So to me, it wasn't much of a threat. Whereas things like Lizard Man, Ropen, Burrunjor, I mean, to me, those things are extremely deadly, large, deadly predators. To me, they would present, I think, more of a threat to Jack and his friends than a 5-foot spider that all it's going to take is, a few rounds from like a Steyr AUG or an M4, and that sucker's down for the count.
Yeah, I agree. You made the right choice. But let's go back here. Okay, so tell me more of what inspired you to write this, because okay, you came across information about the Burrunjor and it just kind of took off. But what did you come across something like articles? Did you talk to people in Australia, anything like that?
No, it was a lot of it was just some of the documentaries I saw,
Okay.
and I think the thing was that Burrunjor is maybe more mysterious than a lot of cryptids
Okay,
because
right.
there haven't really doing the research for it. There haven't really been a lot of sightings of the Burrunjor over the past 100 or so years. In fact, I think they said the last publicized sighting of a Burrunjor took place in 1985. I think it was some family, just driving around the bush and they saw this thing. There have been a few footprints discovered. I think a few people have made some plaster casts out of them. In fact, I actually wrote a blog doing a little background about the Burrunjor on my website. That's my writer's website. That's jjrustwriter.com. So you can go there and check that out for yourself. And again, I mean, who doesn't love dinosaurs? And the more I researched about this, the more I was like, well, Jack and Karen need to have a honeymoon. And of course, since they're cryptid hunters, well, they can't just have a regular honeymoon where they go, they take some tours, they have some nice romantic interludes, and then that's it. It's like, no, they got to go on their honeymoon and they got to stumble onto a cryptid or something because
Why not?
because that's the way it is in this universe. And hey, it is an action adventure novel, and you got to have action adventure in it. So that's, like I said, that just inspired me to do it. And like I said, it's a dinosaur. It sounds like it's something deadly, and I'm like, that would fit in perfectly with my style of storytelling.
Not to give anything away, really, but I'm guessing if you're dealing with a dinosaur, I'm thinking maybe it dies later on. I don't want to give that away. But can you elaborate on how they handle it?
Of course. Yeah. So, and again, that's the other thing because they're fighting this Burrunjor, and it's like, well, Jack didn't bring any guns or anything like that. He doesn't even have a survival knife. In fact, that was one of the things I looked at for Australia, and apparently in Australia, it's against the law to own, say, survival knives, even pocket knives. Which
Really?
which kind of, yeah,
In the bush?
it took me by surprise too. But the thing is with Jack and Karen, the kind of stuff they've been through, it's like, well, they would come prepared to some extent,
Sure.
in case something did happen. I mean, so they packed a survival kit with extra food, extra water, suntan lotion, first aid kit. They brought matches with them. So it's like, well, what could they pack in a survival kit that they could get away with being in Australia? And since they don't have any weapons, it's like, well, they have to forge their own. Like I said, Jack and Karen, they kind of have to use their ingenuity in order to figure out, well, how are we going to defeat this 20-foot long prehistoric killing machine when they don't even have so much as like a 22 snub nose or anything.
See, that's, again, I like that story because you're like, okay, look, we didn't bring anything. You know what that almost sounds like, but better to me. Alien 3, where they didn't have any weapons to fight off the alien. Now, I'm not comparing his book to a dismal Alien 3 movie, okay?
Yeah.
Not to bring it down.
Saying, yeah.
Well, what I'd like to do next is I think we'll talk about some of these sightings and we'll see what we can compare of what we know, and then we'll go from there. But before we do, I'm going to take a quick break and give a shout out to a couple sponsors. You are listening to Cryptozoological Talk on the RRN Ropen Radio Network. We'll be right back with John Rust and the Burrunjor.
Hey, Safari Guy here from Wildlife Safari. I've traveled all the way to Africa to bring you closer to some of the wildest animals on the planet. Only in Africa can you find this kind of action.
Hey, Safari Guy. This isn't Africa. This is Oregon.
Oh.
At Wildlife Safari, you'll discover a whole new world filled with amazing creatures right in your own backyard. Wildlife Safari, I-5, exit 119 in beautiful Southern Oregon. It's closer than you think.
Hey, can I get a ride?
Like a monster. I hate what I've become. The nightmare's just begun. I must confess that I feel like a monster. I feel it deep within. It's just beneath the skin. I must confess that I feel like a monster.
All right, back on Cryptozoological Talk. You're listening to the RRN, the Ropen Radio Network. We discuss everything related to the unknown cryptids. Are they out there? Yes, they are. And one gentleman has written many books about them. They're exciting. I suggest you check them out. Demon Flyer was fantastic. And I can't wait to read Burrunjor the second time. But I don't want to give anything away. I wanted him to elaborate on the show for your sake, okay? Because I'm not going to do as good a job as he will explaining, as he's the author, for crying out loud. This is John Rust and his latest book, Burrunjor. We're discussing a living theropod roaming Australia. It was enough to write a story about. Oh, definitely. This one doesn't get a lot of respect as others do because the idea seems to a lot of people in the scientific community crazy. They'll say, oh, look, it's a living dinosaur. They're extinct. Are they really? Come on. Okay. I believe there are two different versions of the Burrunjor out there. One could be a Megalania and one could be a theropod tyrannosaurid of some sort, which fits in the group of Allosaurus, Tarbosaurus, or we're talking about Albertosaurus, Gorgosaurus, the list goes on. Okay. The problem with some of the size comparisons are that it is 20 to 30 feet. Well, Tyrannosaurus is bigger than that, but it doesn't mean that it's not part of the family. If this thing is really out there in Australia. John, a group actually went out there in the early 2000s. I want to say they actually finally put the video out there in 2007. Destination Truth with Josh Gates went out there. The problem is they went to the southern part of Australia. They didn't go to the northern part. The reports of a theropod are in the northern part of Australia, which is the deserts area, far more vast. But no one ventured that far, except for two other people. One may come to mind, John. Rex Gilroy. Have you heard of him?
Actually, I don't think I'm too familiar with Rex Gilroy.
Okay. Rex is the one who found the footprints of the Burrunjor and casted it. As a matter of fact, it's the only cast that's out there. The question is it legit? And I'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, that's the thing that we have to really look at. I'm not saying that he's making any of this up. It's just that you have to really study these things in order to understand. And you're going to have to know a little bit about paleontology to see if this really is an actual footprint. It might be, and then it may not be. That's the problem. But those are things we have to deal with as investigators. We have to look into it. But some of the sightings that I really enjoy kind of are a mishmash, John, between what we think is probably a Megalania and this theropod. Strangely enough, and like John was saying, there's not much when it comes to the theropod part, okay? But nonetheless, we've got quite a bit of sightings. I'm going to go into this. I think you'll find this fascinating, John. If you haven't heard this already, if you had, you just tell me. But I'm going to read some of these. I think you're going to like this. In December of 1968, Steve B. was in the Normandy Mountains of Queensland, about 200 kilometers south of Townsville, for a military exercise. One part of the exercise required Steve's unit to negotiate a particular treacherous and dense swampy area. As the team went into the area, they found a cow with large chunks eaten out of it. The cow's blood had a trail either from the predator's mouth or from wherever the cow came from. Around them were massive three-toed tracks. Three-toed. Okay, so knowing what a dinosaur's footprint pattern is, it's three-toed if you're talking about a theropod carnivore. Megalania have 5. Okay, and it's not the same print because they're more like claws because it's lizard reptile. Okay. Another sighting was of a giant lizard that was said to have occurred near Mount Isa in Australia in 1961, when a dust storm forced a group of hunters, including a man called Tom Geohan, to take shelter. In the distance across the flat terrain, a huge reptile crossed in front of them. At one point, it stood upright and looked around, then lumbered into the rainforest. Once the storm had passed, the men immediately left the area. sighting number 2, 1961. Have you heard of these?
The second one, the one in 61, sounds vaguely familiar to me. I didn't know about the Australian soldiers who went on the exercise and found what was left of that poor cow.
I find it more credible when we hear about soldiers, someone who served in the military, because what reason do they have to lie about these things, really? So I always like to lean their direction. I especially like to lean the direction of tribes as well. People who are used to those environments that will choose to come forward if they've seen something. Most of the time, when you have researchers out in those areas, John, those who are here in the States will claim that bribes are being made in order for these people to say they've seen a living dinosaur. I can vouch for the fact that that's not true. Okay, that's just a myth. But continuing on, though, in May of 1961, 3 loggers were marking trees in the Wollemi rainforest in New South Wales. The loggers then sat down in their camp and cleared the area in a cleared area to have tea. In the cleared area, the trees were all down, but they weren't removed. When one of them sat down, they heard a very large crunch sound. They all looked to the direction of the noise and saw what they called a Titanic-sized Komodo dragon, like lizard, being 25 to 30 feet long, and its legs were 3 feet off the ground. The lizard immediately started running towards them down an embankment. They all ran to their truck and watched it pace around them a couple of times before heading back into the rainforest. Can you imagine what that's like? To have something that size around you?
I probably need to change my underwear after an experience like that.
Yeah, most people say, "Oh, you're full of it, Jake. You would never chase." Yes, I would. I would totally chase after it. And I've just wait till I get into one of these environments. Maybe it's not a good thing. Well, in 1975, in the Watongan Mountains, 1975, 2 farmers saw a log on the road ahead of them. But as they got closer to the log, it walked away, revealing it was actually a massive monitor lizard. Massive. Now, this report here gets to 1978, where we're talking about a theropod, okay? Another report tells of a man named Brian Clark. We have a name. I like it when we have names. If we have a first name, maybe a middle initial, fine, I'll read that, okay? But I really prefer to have names when it comes to these things. He went into the woods and got lost sometime during 1978. After the alarm was raised, he was tracked by policemen and 2 Aboriginal bushmen. The trackers woke up one night to a loud, thunderous sound, and the ground shaking after finding the wayward traveler. Policemen later told the man that if he ever went back into the woods and got lost, they would not come looking for him again. Some think the sound was the stomping of the Burrunjor. However, a light-footed theropod dinosaur would not crash around the undergrowth in this manner, despite what certain Spielberg movies would have the public believe. I'm going to disagree on that one. What makes you think that? If it's a reptile, and it's a fairly large one, it's going to crash around. This one is a close resemblance to a theropod. Have you heard this one?
Actually, yeah, that was I think when I was doing research for my blog article on the Burrunjor, I did come across that story, and I really like that line from the policeman saying like, "Hey, if you get lost in the woods again, dude, you're on your own, because I ain't coming to look for you, not with this thing out there."
Well, it's actually interesting because there's actually 2 different versions of this story. If you start doing some deep digging, there's actually the side from the officer was that the Aborigines had seen this thing too, and they were running away. And they all decided to run away, thinking something's chasing them. And the policeman decided to go with them, say, okay, look, I'm just going to run too. So it turns out there could have been even more there because there's 2 different sides of that story. But this one seems to be the most norm when it comes to the theropod. And then 1979, herpetologist Frank Gordon took his ATV up into the mountains of Limpenwood Nature Reserve in New South Wales to look for water skinks, a species he was studying at the time. After hours of not finding one, he rested his back on a large log. He had gone away on his vehicle, and then when he returned about an hour later, he said the log had moved from where it was before. After getting closer to move it, he figured out it wasn't a log, but a giant lizard. As soon as he realized this, he reared up and ran into it reared up its head, ran into the rainforest. In comparison to his ATV, he said it was 28 feet long. All of this is actually consistent in size, because we're talking anything from 20 to 30 feet, but it sure seems there's a lot more stories related to a monitor lizard, or the Megalania, which are out in Australia. Okay. They have found remains of Megalania, but they're not as abundant like a pterosaur. The fossils are scarce. A complete skeleton of a Megalania is rare to find, but you can get certain pieces of them here and there. But there isn't very many structural Megalania out there that you can go and look at for yourself because of how scarce they are, or how rare the skeleton, a full skeleton is. Again, consistency, John. Fascinating.
Yeah,
but
and I have heard stories of. I think one of the names they call them are was it the devil lizards or devil dragon? I think it is. I have heard that. I think the old show on History Channel, Monster Hunters. They did an episode on devil dragon. So and yeah, I think for like even the most ardent skeptics out there for cryptozoology, I think they would have to say it's like, look, if something's going to be likely, it could be something along the lines of a giant monitor lizard. I mean, you look in that area. I mean, you go north of Australia, you do have Komodo dragons, and they go what, about maybe 15, 16 feet roughly. You got saltwater crocodiles in Australia that can get up to what, maybe like 20 feet, rough guesstimate. So, I mean, if for the skeptics out there, if you want to believe in something, I would say that, you could probably lean more to the believer's side on these reports of giant monitor lizards.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would love to lean the other direction, like I said. But then again, no one has really journeyed to the Northern Territory, which is huge. Okay. They really need to. If you're going to do a show about this, I'm surprised they stuck to the southern part. I didn't see the show you just recently mentioned. I haven't seen that one. Maybe they ventured north, but for whatever reason, they decided to stick to the south. But then again, you're going to find most of your Komodo dragons, those kind of dragon-like creatures, in the southern part of Australia. Yes, they're north. They're going to be north as well. But for whatever reason, they chose to stick there, because if you're doing a show and you don't provide anything, like sometimes Monster Quest, we love to get into the scientific part, but you got to be able to see something too, right? So they're like, okay, if we don't find this creature, let's at least show the dragons in their habitat. I agree. I think that's a good move. You want to have at least something rather than nothing. But I hope that somebody will eventually decide to go forward to the northern area. And like I said, there's only very few people who have. Rex Gilroy is one of them. Another gentleman I'll be having on the show in 2 weeks. He'll be joining me to shed some light on this one, because he did go to the Northern Territory, and he went and talked to Aborigines out there about the Burrunjor, a theropod Burrunjor. I'm going to find out if there's something to back it up for sure. Well, we'll find out. Another account of the Burrunjor happened in 1985. Probably familiar with this one. When a family was traveling to the Roper River, and they reported to see a 20-foot monster. Now, according to this information, they describe, in 2 different cases, they describe one with feathers, one without. Okay, well, that's odd, because if it's a Megalanias don't have feathers or any kind of fur or fuzz. Now, recent studies are showing that some dinosaurs do have, feathers, okay, but not all of them. And this is still a split, 50-50 when it comes to paleontologists. They're not necessarily on the bad wagon on this one. But it's interesting, wouldn't you say? Because all of this, the feather thing started surfacing later on. Now, this is 1985. So maybe there's something there, but we don't have a name. I don't have any name of the family members, nothing like that. Did you hear about this one too?
Actually, yeah, I think I did reference that in my blog, and again, I believe as far as I know, that's like the the last publicly acknowledged sighting of, I guess, the theropod version of Burrunjor. And yeah, I know what you're saying about I'd like to have a name to go along with this. I think that's the problem when sometimes when you're dealing with like, say you're just like average Joe or Jane or whatever out there, and they see something like this. I think, well, especially in our social media age, I think they feel like, if I mention this to anyone, if I put this out publicly, then I'm going to be ridiculed. My life is going to be turned upside down. In fact, recently I watched a couple documentaries about the Minnesota UFO incident from the 1970s, where a supposed UFO apparently caused damage to a sheriff's deputy's car in one of the counties up there in Minnesota. And when that report came out, this poor deputy's life was turned upside down to the point that he and his family had to move to another city, just to get away from all the phone calls and the visitors saying, hey, you got to tell us what happened. You got to tell us what happened. So again, that's kind of like the dual-edged sword. It's like, yeah, you would think that, if someone provides, a name and someone you can get in contact with, then that would make the sighting report more plausible or more acceptable. But again, I think for some people, they're like, hey, I just don't want this attention, so I'm just going to not give my name, or I'll just go by an alias. Yeah,
unfortunately. And I understand that, because that's mostly what I deal with, or what we deal with, is that there's a lot of people who want to tell their story. They do, and they move on. And that's fine. And then very few come on this network and talk about it. Most of the times I'm getting just phone calls. But here, every once in a while, we'll be able to have somebody join me on the network, and we can record this. We get audio, we got video, and that helps. But most of the time, they're dealing with a lot of ridicule. It's too bad. They're like, hey, if I bring this up, people are going to think I'm a lunatic. Nowadays, I hope that's really changing because of what's going on. There's so much of it now than there was in the past. And it seemed like the 1970s was a hot time for a lot of cryptids. Out of nowhere, just a lot of sightings of these creatures. It's amazing. So yeah, I totally understand. And that's where we wish there was. Well, there's a couple other people have come forward and told me about this, where a park ranger said they saw a Burrunjor, a theropod. But again, what's his name? We don't know. So I don't know if I can really consider that something I could really go on and try to investigate. It's good to have some names, such as in 2005, Frankie Shoveler, a Kurrajari musician teacher from the remote community of Bidyadenga in Western Australia. Now, he filmed a series of massive three-toed reptilian footprints in the sand on a beach. The tracks were shown to him by some local children who were fishing when they noticed them. Though often considered to belong to a Burrunjor, many locals from Bidyadenga believe they belong to the gigantic flightless bird, as they do somewhat resemble an emu's footprints, albeit much larger. And John, you can actually see this one online. I'm going to post this so everybody can see it. There are actual tracks. And you see three toes. But I do want to bring something up that's very important. For instance, tracks were found in the 1950s in Queensland, Australia, that are presumably a tyrannosaurid family. The tracks are about 2.6, which actually makes them the largest, if not the largest, footprints of a tyrannosaur found, or tyrannosaurid found. These tracks that Frankie found, the problem with them is, I'll give you an example. When it comes to a theropod, the prints are like stretched out. The two on the side, and then there's one in the middle. If the toe in the middle isn't bigger than the other two, we have a problem, because it more likely resembles a bird, okay, if they're all the same height. So we have tracks. We have someone who filmed them, but we don't know for sure if that is an actual tyrannosaur. If we're leaning on what is positive proof of what a tyrannosaur track looks like, or one of the member of the families, then we would probably say they aren't related. They could be a large bird, because bird tracks kind of resemble dinosaur prints in a way. Okay, I'm not saying the birds are dinosaurs, but you get where I'm going at here. Yeah. At least there was something we could go off of. Tracks here. Tracks seem to be the biggest thing involving a theropod roaming Australia, if there's something to boot. Now, when I mentioned Rex Gilroy, how did he get that cast? Where did he find it? I tried to get Rex on the show so you and I could talk to him. There's a time zone difference, which is really difficult because he's in Australia and he's dealing with a lot of health issues. So he was very gung-ho about coming on the show, but I couldn't get him to commit. And then eventually I lost communication between him and me. So that's kind of where I am. It's a bummer, but that's the way it goes sometimes. So, yeah. And then also in 2014, a hiker named A. Sleepman was in Limpwood Nature Reserve on a small trail. He was walking. He was hearing the crunch of leaves behind him. He looked behind him and saw a huge monitor lizard with more than 2 foot wide head tasting the air with its forked tongue. Out of panic, he sprinted into the rainforest and hid behind a rock. He then heard the creature's footsteps stomp away, and he got back to safety. And that was the last report, 2014. But again, this resembles a monitor lizard, a Megalania, so to speak. So I only have maybe 2 or 3 accounts of an actual theropod, but still, the idea intrigues so many. And to have someone write a story about this and kind of just broaden the imagination a little bit more really does help, because that, who knows, someone may decide to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to push forward, see what else I can find and travel out to Australia. When people come forward and like authors and they write books, you never know who you're going to inspire when someone reads it, you know? And as you're seeing, you've inspired me because I love what you're doing and you're doing a great job of it. And that's what we needed for the longest time. We needed someone who gets this, and you do. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. And like I said, I mean, you know, cryptid, I think even before they started, you know, before they did the term cryptid and cryptozoology, I mean, I was fascinated by that stuff. I mean, growing up as a little kid, watching the old In Search Of program with Leonard Nimoy, and then just going on from there. And like any show that dealt with paranormal, cryptids, UFOs, you know, I was there for that. And even today, I'm 52 years old. I go onto YouTube and it's like, oh, here's Destination Declassified. Oh, here's Bedtime Stories. Oh, here's the Paranormal Scholar, Unexplained Mysteries. It's like, what are they talking about? Oh, this is interesting. I'm there for that. And that's the thing, because these channels, you know, sometimes they give me inspiration. Unexplained Mysteries, they did a mini doc on the Ropen, and that's what finally clicked in my head to like, okay, that's the cryptid I'm going to have for my 3rd Jack Raskin novel.
Yep. I'm glad you did that. And a lot of people actually responded to that one too. They're like, hey, I think I'll buy that one. So good. We had someone who took notice of the Ropen of what we do here on this network. So with it being your 4th book, Burrunjor, I suggest everybody go out and check it out. Go ahead and purchase it. I think you're going to enjoy it. Burrunjor by John Rust, who continues to make some really exciting books and has now become one of my favorite authors, right next to Frank Peretti, when it comes to dealing with creatures and supernatural things or events and everything. So exciting to have him here. I'm glad he's here today. And aside from books and everything like that, what's next for John?
You know, just, you know, keep on keeping on with, what I do at KYCA with covering the sports there. Actually, I'm almost done sending my next book through my critique group. And, this is going to be a wild one. Just the title alone, I think will get everyone interested. The Red Baron versus Mothman.
Wow. Okay. We'll look forward to that when that arrives, huh? And make sure and give me a shout out when that actually does
definitely
hit. Okay. Nice. John, I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. Thank you for all the work you do. And thank you for having such a great voice when it comes to sports. You can check him out on the radio station KYCA.
KYCA.info. That's our website.
Yeah. And also, he does Rust rants. I have to agree with you, John. She-Hulk is a disaster.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And it's a shame because like I've said in those rants, it's like, I always thought the She-Hulk character was really great. I mean, it wasn't just, well, let's make Hulk female. Like, no, they made She-Hulk her own unique character, and kind of see what they did, and just, just really kind of tarnish her character and not even come up with good stories. It's like, and again, as a writer myself, I kind of get offended. It's like, look, just keep the politics, keep whatever opinions you have, just out of it. It's like, just tell a really good story. I want to see She-Hulk just beat the tar out of supervillains. That's what I'm here for. It's like, I don't go in and write my Jack Raskin novel saying, well, what social issue shall I address here? It's like, no, I want to have Jack and his friends chase around cryptids and fight them off and save people, and at times also preserve the lives of these cryptids.
Nice. He said it perfectly. I agree, John. Thank you so much for being on the Ropen Network. Appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of your week. I hope you have a great weekend.
Well, you too. And again, thank you very much for inviting me back on the show. I appreciate it. And you keep up the good work too, man.
I will. Until next time, we'll see you then.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye. That was John Rust, author and sports radio host for KYCA, the Tri-City States. You can find him also on Rust Rants on YouTube. Checked out a few of those. Really like them. John Rust. Oh, you know what? I was going to ask him a question. I completely spaced this one. John, if you're listening, be sure to get back to me about this one. I'm really curious to know what your thoughts are. If somebody was to portray your characters as a full, Hollywood story, who would you want to play Jack Raskin and Karen Thatcher? Let me go back for a moment here and think about something that was said. We touched on the Megalania. We touched on the theropods. Interesting enough, when I think back about the tracks found in the 1950s, 80 centimeters in length, 2.6 feet, found in Queensland, Australia, a Tyrannosaurus rex, potentially. They're not quite sure which one it is. It belongs to the Tyrannosaur family. Okay, 2.6 feet. Like I had told John, why did it take so long for them to bring this out? It was discovered in the 1950s. Found in Queensland, the northern part of Australia. Why did it take so long? Now, they'll say that these are millions of years old tracks. No, they're not. These are thousands of years old. Okay? This is important because if the eyewitnesses' story holds true, then we're dealing with an actual theropods group of them roaming Australia's Arnhem Land, the Northern Territory. How about that? When you look at the size of a Tyrannosaur print, I want to bring up one that was found in Hells Creek, Montana in 2011. The story was ran in October. As you can see, the toe is bigger in the middle than the other two. Okay? The prints that were found off the coastline in Australia in the sand, the middle toe is not bigger. So that's a problem. Like I said, it very well could be a bird tracks instead. Okay. This print, on the other hand, was actually 2.5. So there's pretty close similarities there. And these tracks are quite common in Hells Creek, Montana, as Tyrannosaur fossils have been found all over those canyons, along with Triceratops. Famous discoveries were found there by Mary Schweitzer and, of course, Mark Armitage. Yeah. People of interest that we have mentioned. I really hope that Rex Gilroy will come forward with this because, again, he's the only one who holds the key to whether or not these are real tracks that he found. He found them. Now, Frankie Shoveler is the one who filmed them back in 2005. Okay. However, two separate people, two separate times. So we don't know just how much evidence there really is to prove that Rex Gilroy's print is real. He did show a cast and is quite large. Okay, that very well could fit a Burrunjor theropod. There are some problems that people have brought up, especially paleontologists. The print itself is a problem because there's no impression in the middle of like a pad of some sort. That was one of the arguments. Some people have called Rex out on this, and he may have said, hey, you know what, I'm done. I did my part. I discovered something. You can believe it or you don't have to believe it. It's up to you. Regardless, he has a track. He has a cast. Okay. So this is very, very interesting. But we won't know for sure unless he decides to step forward and share that with us on this network. Maybe down the road he will, but for now, that's not the case. All we have related to an actual theropod Burrunjor is going to be a couple of accounts that are not quite mentioning a theropod. And then we have tracks. We have the recorded tracks. We have a cast that was made. And then we have just 2 reports, maybe 3 reports tops. And that's it. There's one man who may be able to shed even more light on the subject, not just Josh Gates or someone else. And he'll be joining us next time. He may step forward and say, hey, look, I've gone and talked to people. This thing is really out there. Or it's not, because there's just not enough substantial proof to back it up, to back the claim. And that's where we're at. I think it makes for a fascinating subject. The whole thing makes someone very curious, gets them really interested in the whole idea about a living dinosaur, a living tyrannosaur, somewhere out there right now in Arnhem Land, roaming those areas. How mysterious is that? Very mysterious. Folks, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for joining me on the network. John Rust is always a blast. I love his books. He's going to keep writing, and I'm looking forward to the Red Baron versus the Mothman. This sounds crazy. Nonetheless, glad he joined us here. In the meantime, I'll leave you. What do you think? Is a Burrunjor real? Or is it not? Seek the truth. God bless every one of you on the other side of the screen. I'm your host, Jacob Guerra. I'll see you next time on the Ropen Radio